Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 2 of Demystifying Customer Experience and Contact Centers. Once again, I'm your co-host, Rufino Chung, and I'm also the practice director for CX and Contact Centers here at UiPath for Europe. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome. The goal we have for these sessions is to help provide some clarity to the misperceptions and complexities that's causing confusion in our space. So the hope is that whether you are the most experienced professional or brand new to the space, we can provide you with some guidance, some insights, and some actionable advice in terms of what you should be doing, and perhaps more importantly, what you should not be doing. Now, to help us do that, for every episode, we'll be joined by some experts and thought leaders. So, for example, last episode, we had a great discussion around demystifying the CX tech stack. And for today's episode, we'll talk about demystifying the data that is needed to drive proactive and predictive service. Now, we are joined today by two special thought leaders and experts. Firstly, we are joined by our own resident thought leader and also my esteemed co-host, Scott Dresser. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Rufino.
Excellent. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, perhaps you can give a brief overview of your experience, particularly in the CX and contact center space.
I've been in the contact center space for a long time, over 2 decades, which makes me feel very old. I've had the pleasure of working for some pretty big industry leaders like Avaya and Cisco Systems and Salesforce, and also had the opportunity to work for a Fortune 300 company as a customer myself in a customer experience practice, working with a team to run a large call center environment. I've been at UiPath for a year on the customer experience team, working with some of our largest customers. I love this space. It's very exciting, always changing.
Well, thank you very much, Scott, for joining us. And we're also joined today by our special guest, Tom Gołębiowski. Tom, can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name's Tom. I work in our AI solution architecture team. But really, I come from an acquisition that UiPath made, a company called Reinfer a couple of years ago. And we were very much in the natural language processing space. And that's now evolved into our communications mining capability. What that means is I would speak to a lot of customers every day about use cases. And a lot of customers have use cases in the contact center. Also in operations, also in shared services, also in finance. But to be honest, across all of these different kind of functions, contact center, customer experience, all of these are key outcomes that our customers are looking to achieve. So yeah, looking forward today to sharing some stories and things I hear from the field that hopefully others who are listening to this podcast can resonate with and experiencing similar situations. So yeah, thanks, Rufino.
Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us today. As for me, just a quick background for those of you who are joining us for the first time. My background has always been in the experience space, so both in the CX side, but also in the employee experience space. So in the customer experience side, I spent most of my career at Gartner, where I launched and then led our customer contact practice for Europe. It was actually more on the EX space that I developed a love and passion for data. I actually worked for a tech startup that was focused on measuring the employee experience. And so lots of data that we had to collect and analyze. And so maybe we'll just jump right into it for today. And there was a stat that actually came from Gartner recently. I don't know, Scott, if you saw it, but in that data point from Gartner, it was that the amount of proactive communications and proactive service by organizations has actually doubled since 2020. And certainly here at UiPath, working with organizations, we have lots of great stories helping customers with proactive and predictive service. So for example, we helped a Canadian telecommunications company predict 9 out of 10 future maintenance calls and be able to deflect it. And then also we helped a HR payroll outsourcer in churn in just the first 3 months. But certainly, I think the issue with predictive and proactive service is that it's easier said than done, especially on the data side. So it can be very easy to be overwhelmed by data, and then therefore being very hard to tease out those actionable insights to be able to drive that proactive and predictive service. And so maybe, Scott, I'd like to bring you into the conversation and ask you, when you hear the terms proactive and predictive service, what immediately jumps to mind for you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that stand out to me. And I think one is the term predictive. We've actually been doing versions of that in the call center for a really long time. There's been some great technology and software capabilities from most of the call routing platforms that we've been able to do some pretty elaborate schemes in call routing to do dips into data and make some really intelligent routing decisions for a long time. But I think that what really changed for the industry is when we started doing customer journey mapping, and we started really trying to understand what is the path for each individual interaction type. What do they navigate based on a request type? What systems are they accessing? How do they go from the outside in? And how do they traverse? What information are they accessing? What systems do they need from a customer's perspective, and also from an internal resource perspective? What do we need to be able to answer those inquiries? And I think that started really this eye-opening for us, just really how complex our systems were. And that really exposed a lot of environments, the complexity of data, poor data, and our inability to really create unified experiences, and also just how hard it really was to make sure that we could do things like predictive support or proactive support. And what that led to is people just doing simple use cases. Oh, this one is pretty easy, so let's just do proactive notifications for this one thing. We go out and buy a SMS engine, we can notify people about this one experience because it really only needs one system. Or we can do predictive because this only requires 2 pieces of information. So we started really to isolate, and actually it relates back to what we talked about in our first podcast about how we made our environment so complex, because we were trying to do things like this because we know it lowers costs and it does improve the customer experience if we start to be more proactive and predictive. But I think that we were onto something. I think just how we started to try to solve it, everybody did a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think certainly we've advanced quite a bit in terms of the solution potential for predictive and proactive service. I remember this is probably like 20 years ago, in fact, where my first exposure to proactive service was this vacuum cleaner company. And the story was basically the filter was very hard to change, so much so that oftentimes customers would actually damage the first filter. And they would get all these contacts about the damaged filter. So their solution was to simply package up extra filters, knowing that the first one would probably be damaged by the customer in replacing it. So I think we've advanced a long way since that vacuum cleaner story. But Tom, maybe you can help level set us a bit by giving us a primer, if you will, in terms of what exactly is proactive and predictive service.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to what Scott was saying around complexity of data being a preventer of proactive service, right? We've talked about it. It's about preempting what the customer needs and delivering that experience more quickly, more effectively, right? The point I was going to piggyback off of Scott's around complexity of data is, and again, it comes back to this simplistic approach, is almost the wrong way to phrase it, but understanding what's going on today is not a new thing. Countless companies take surveys, take call samples. They really look at what they've already got and try and make sense of it to try and figure out where are the quick wins, right? Simple is almost a wrong word, right? It's about quick wins, what's going to deliver the most value, from the quickest implementation. But actually, if you look at the more complex data that maybe is traditionally harder to get insights from, you can almost look at it as almost risk versus reward. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it, right? In the sense that if you look at all this unstructured data, all this feedback, all these communications, everything that's coming in, that gives you such an insight into the silent majority, right? It's often the most angry, it's the loudest who actually will give you that traditional means of understanding what's going on. But the reality is, as I say, there's so much more out there that we can use to identify opportunities to deliver a more proactive, predictive service. So one use case, I think it was the one you mentioned earlier, Rufino, around churn prevention. We've did this with some customers where we look at email chasers, escalations like wanting to speak to a manager, negative sentiment like when they're actually angry, when they mention a competitor and they're looking elsewhere. All of these things are examples of the quality of the service, right? And today, only deciphered by a human reading and understanding. But if we can make sense of that unstructured, complex data, we can turn that into a report or some sort of automated action to say, hey, look, there's a customer here that looks like they're going to leave. Offer them a discount, offer them some good service. We can prevent that from happening. And that's exactly how you can achieve stats around preventing churn, preventing these really top level metrics. That one that I referenced earlier around this toothbrush toothpaste, I remember we did a use case with a retailer in the UK, looking at customer service, looking at contact center, looking at emails, which was a lower priority channel for them, but still a channel where they needed to deliver a good service. And what they noticed was they were getting a big chunk of the emails were related to customers who were complaining they'd ordered a toothbrush and toothpaste and they were getting one and not the other. And so they were sending an email to the contact center saying, hey, I've received this, but not this, and I ordered both together. Where's the rest of my order? And the agent would literally just have to say, oh, they come from 2 different distribution centers. It's on its way, don't worry. And that is adding absolutely zero value for that person doing that work, because they're just sending the same email out every single time. But by understanding this was a big chunk, the retailer in question, quite simply, just make a change on the website. Set up an alert to say, if you order this and you order this, they may arrive at different times. And that prevents the customer from needing to send that email, because they know in advance. It's the proactive side of things. They know in advance what to expect. They no longer need to send that email, which requires a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, however long from that agent to deal with that response, which they can then put that 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever, into actually dealing with something that really needs a lot of human effort. To Scott's point, is that making sense of that complexity of data to really understand where you can deliver the biggest opportunities for proactive service. That's the key. I would say to anyone listening to this podcast, in your own organizations, thinking, where do we have people as core translators of information, translators of unstructured to structured? Because reading emails, dealing with calls, processing tickets, those are going to be such big opportunities to proactive service.
And we alluded to the data already. Obviously, we can be overwhelmed by data. So perhaps, Tom, you can give us some guidance in terms of what type of data should we be collecting, and a clarification on that question, what type of data is most useful for us?
Rufino, you're not going to like the answer to this. The answer to this is every bit of data. But the reason I say that is because it's not just the unstructured. I've talked a lot about unstructured emails communication so far, but actually it's the combination of the unstructured with the structured that I think is where you can have the biggest impact. So I'll give you another example. We worked with a large e-commerce, fashion, luxury retailer marketplace, and it was all about customer feedback coming into the contact center. Now, what they would do is they would understand where customers were complaining about or giving feedback about packaging, about the response times, about delivery, about, the logistics provider, about everything relate to the products. Now, what they would take from that unstructured to structured is they would then combine that customer profiles, right? Mm-hmm. Spend value in the CRM. Because if you understand what your biggest spenders are complaining about or having the biggest problems with, those are probably the things you want to fix first, because ultimately those are your customers that are spending the most, that are driving most of your business. You can say the same for the lowest spenders. What are the customers that are only doing single purchase and then giving feedback about? Right? What are they saying? And in certain regions, right? Because ultimately, if you can fix those things, you're more likely to turn them into repeat purchases. And again, it's this combination of the structured with the unstructured. If the question that you want to be able to ask as a customer experience lead, as a contact center lead, to be able to drive the business forward, where can you get that data and how can you combine these together? And even if it's unstructured, how can you think art the possible of what you want to get out of it?
Yeah, and I think one aspect which may be for a different podcast, but I just want to bring up the toothpaste example, which is collecting what is data can also help identify market opportunities as well. So less about predictive and proactive service, but more about driving market opportunities. So the fun example that I have is all about charcoal toothpaste, where this toothpaste company started getting a lot of inquiries about, does charcoal actually make your teeth whiter? And based on that feedback, they actually launched their own charcoal toothpaste product line, not even knowing if charcoal really works, but because they kept getting questions about it, they thought it was a good market opportunity. That's more the VOC side and looking at market opportunities, but lots of great stories about getting this data and then being able to drive opportunities either proactively to prevent sort of contacts, but also identify market opportunities as well. How about you, Scott? Any fun stories from your experience?
Yeah, that's a good one. Anytime you start getting a lot of questions asked if something is valid, that might be a good marketing opportunity to start putting a product into the market just to test it. When I think back to when IoT first started coming into the scene and people started testing the reality of that, you realize if that had any hope, and as it started to have some traction, the only way that's possible is if data is organized and clean and can be interpreted by systems in order for them to be able to make intelligent decisions on their own. And I remember working at Salesforce. This was as Service Cloud started to really explode. And our prediction at the time through the product organization was that within the next 15 years, that systems would be creating more cases than humans. And I think we've largely seen that come true. If you think about that, if that's true, then being proactive and predictive is absolutely possible. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We've seen all the benefits of AI, which I know is going to be a future topic for us. That's where the value of AI starts to really come into the mix. But I think as a customer myself, you start to see the brands that are getting it right. And then the companies that we do business with, you start to see them ask the right questions that we ask them, and they're asking us, why are we waiting for customers to contact us? It's really expensive. Why aren't we being more proactive and preempt that outreach? How do we get smarter? How do we utilize things like personal research assistants on the web? And how do we use things like agent assist and AI tools on the agent side to be smarter so we can do things like measure intent? And those are the right questions. And it does come back to data.
So Tom, speaking of analytics, how would you think about the analytics piece, and how do you go about analyzing that data so we can tease out those actionable insights to drive that service?
Analytics comes back to the point that I referenced earlier. It's all about the questions that you want to ask, but it also comes down to the characteristics and nature of the work, and who would find value in, I keep saying it, data. But it also links to what Scott was saying. So let me give you an example. I did some work with an energy company in the States in the contact center. It's B2B, so primarily email based. And for them, they came to us and said, look, there's 4 main contact reasons that we want to identify, and it's invoice copies, statement copies, really kind of transactional stuff. But as it transpired, when we got into talking about the nature of the work and what they actually did, they would get renewal requests from customers or upsell opportunities saying we need to increase our services in this location and that location because we're going to be opening a new office or something. And they didn't really do anything with that information. And it comes back to that. You'd think these big companies and everyone will be talking to each other because your data analytics company should be able to get the data about the order of what's in stock and the inventory to the order processing teams to be able to submit that order. But clearly there was a link not there. And in this example, it was the same sort of thing, right? So you had customers you had upsell opportunities to make more money, and they were just being sent over to sales as and when. And that again comes into that proactive piece. Is if we can monitor this stuff in the contact center and we can identify it and then get it to sales more quickly, sales can act on that more quickly, and then they can actually deliver that service that the customer is expecting, because the speed to answer a sales request often determines how likely you are to win that deal, win that business. So it's about, what do we want to get out of this first and foremost, and what data have we got, and where do we need to connect the dots to be able to deliver that experience. And in this case, obviously making more revenue for that company, increasing revenue, an example of which is in the contact center, upsell opportunities. Let's get those upsell opportunities to the relevant teams faster so they can act on them faster. It all connects together, but it all started with understanding what was coming in, understanding all of that unstructured. Reference the example I used earlier, you could combine it with structured to understand, okay, of those new quote requests or upsell opportunities, which are linked to customers in the CRM that are highest and most important. And then those are the ones we want to act on faster, so we want to be more proactive. It all comes back to what's the goals of you as an organization and what are the questions that you want to ask of your data, and then we can obviously work to help find those answers.
Once you get all these different questions or the data, you actually may have more opportunities than you can actually work on. So Scott, Tom, any guidance or advice of how you recommend prioritizing those potential list of opportunities to work on?
I'd say you mentioned earlier the quick win opportunities. Like, there are so many of them, both on the cost saving side and the experience side. The usage alerts, the easy reminders, the payments, anything to do with billing. There's obviously on the sales side or customer side, churn indicators that we're seeing some really great examples around. There's really great use cases around intent on customers coming inbound, on upsell, and what customer preferences are. So there's so many really good examples, again, both outbound and inbound, that we can use data to do some great predictions with. And it's combining those things with just traditional automation capabilities, and then the additional capabilities that we're getting through reading documents and unstructured data, and now Gen AI. But there's great use cases, and the customers are starting to take advantage of it.
Is there a few areas that you would start first, Scott, out of curiosity?
Well, right now it's cost savings, like preventing them from contacting you. That's where we all probably tend to focus the most. It's how do we save on labor? And there are obviously customer implications that really do help the experience. So, but I would say we look at the top reasons why customers contact you, or what are the preventable things that we can do to notify customers so that it makes them happier, whether it's a positive interaction or a negative interaction around. As an example, we all started getting usage alerts hey, you're going to be going over your data plan. And we're thinking, why would they tell us that? Like, they get more money. And then we started realizing, well, the reason they're telling us that, because if we go to our data plan and we have to spend more money, we're much more likely to leave because now we're irritated. Okay, so it wasn't really about collecting the money that they cared about. It was about that they know we will get mad, we will call them, complain, they will give us a credit, and we will be annoyed so that we cancel our plan and go to another provider. So it's just much easier if they tell us that we are in danger of going over our data plan. So those are the kinds of things that you have to think about. What's better, that you collect some additional revenue or that you prevent the churn much further upstream? And that's an example of that every industry goes through, whether it's healthcare, high tech, consumer goods, it doesn't matter. Banking, you all have those types of examples.
No, I completely agree, and that's exactly it. As Scott said, that's why you analyse the data to understand what connecting the dots together is understanding. Not doing an action like that leads to more churn, so therefore you put in an action of giving people transparency on things like data, and then it leads to the outcome that you want. It's connecting the dots.
Tom, you gave us a lot of good advice in terms of what we should be doing, but do you have any advice or perhaps horror stories in terms of mistakes people have made or what you should not be doing or a different way, a way you should not approach it?
In terms of horror stories, it's an interesting one because I wouldn't say that if you're taking the steps to analyse, to understand, to make improvements, you can always find something out, whether you're getting loads of spam emails that are taking time away from your agents who could be using that time to be answering things that really matter, right? Even that in itself is a useful bit of insight. I wouldn't say that there's much in terms of horror stories. You've got to think about what you want to achieve going into some of these projects. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. What are the questions you want to answer? What is the data that you want to combine together to get to that outcome, right? To reference the point earlier around the churn, if that's the sort of thing you want to prevent, then that's why you look into why are customers contacting us in the contact center and then leaving. To Scott's point, it's because they're going over their plan, they're wanting credit. It's having a goal in mind of what you want to get ahead of and what you want to improve on is the main thing. Because I've seen projects where, to be completely transparent, where you go into it, like for the iPath that I work on, I'm just going to train a model to understand my communications. Oh, okay, cool. That's it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. You have to have purpose. You have to have an objective in mind of where you want to get to, and then let the data that comes out of it, use it to help you to improve on that objective.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said there, Tom. And I know already we've mentioned in a number of the success stories of organizations who have been really good at driving a proactive and predictive service. And Tom, I have one for you, and this is the one I love. You have this great story about pet-friendly customers and not not pet-friendly customers. Now, I'm not pet-friendly. I think Scott is pet-friendly. But can you just elaborate on, I think this really cool story for us.
I'm also pet-friendly, so you're the minority. I'm joking. So basically, again, another project where you're looking for unmet needs, right? In this case, it was with a hotels company on their website. Feedback that customers were giving, and a big bucket of customers were saying, look, we obviously love the service or whatever, but I'm looking for a filter to be able to find hotels that are not pet friendly because I have allergies. There's a filter to select pet friendly, but not a yes or no. So it was a good example of that unmet need, right? Identifying through the feedback that's being given, and it might just be being collected passively through the contact center, but that information that's being recorded, analyzing it, seeing it's a big enough bucket to send that over to the product team to make that change on the website, or through the information they're gathering from the hotels that are listed on the website, to meet that need for the customers. So the customers, obviously, who are looking for that in the market, are more likely to come to you because other customers at this point didn't have that. So it's about differentiation as well. That in itself is proactive service, is figuring out unmet needs that either you or the market aren't providing, and getting the fastest to help capitalize on market share.
Yeah, I think it's a fun example, obviously personally relevant to me, but I love the concept of meeting these unmet needs. So with that, wanted to make sure that we close it out with some final words of wisdom. What are some of the key takeaways that you have for demystifying data for proactive and predictive service?
I just would say that, hey, this isn't easy for any organization and any industry. And I think it's probably getting harder. But if it was easy, they wouldn't need people in our specialization. And I think these teams are getting probably even more spread out, whether you're a traditional contact center, whether you're on innovation teams and strategy teams and AI and automation and COEs. I mean, everybody's diverse across all these teams. And I think hopefully you've heard today is look for those quick win opportunities, those key areas that help you achieve your KPIs that drive the most meaningful outcomes. And there are a lot of them, and they are really big results. Like they drive very big business outcomes, both internally and externally. So there's plenty of tools online and research available to help you do that.
My only final words of wisdom would be, don't fear the unstructured data, particularly in the contact center. It's going to be one of the biggest chunks of work. If you can work to structure that and combine that with other structured data and ask those interesting questions, get to those quick wins, like Scott said, that's powerful, right? That's how you identify the things that you can predict, and then how you can provide the most proactive service to your customers.
Well, thank you very much, Tom and Scott. It was fun as always. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for episode number 2. Coming up for future episodes, we'll look to tackle a few topics. One is future-proofing the contact center, and also another one that Scott alluded to, which is demystifying AI and automation for contact centers. In addition, very exciting to let you know that Scott and I will be doing a podcast in Las Vegas in October, so we hope to see you there as well. Thank you again for joining us, and see you soon.